usually the number that you hear, okay? So it's a very serious risk factor for boys, that their ability to learn to be a man is compromised by not having a father figure in the home. And so all this power that a teenage boy has, and all this energy that a teenage boy has, he doesn't know what to do with it without a father figure in the home. So it's a very serious matter. So to say that moms and dads are interchangeable hides that fact from us, right? That the father is doing something important, even if he's not tying shoes as often as the mother's tying shoes. See all these little things the social science people like to measure, right? I'll talk about measurement later if you want to, but the father's authority is not something that's easily measured or calculated, but it's just a reality. It's a presence in the home, okay? Now, the absence of the father for girls has a different kind of impact. The thing that girls are mostly at risk for is for early sexualization. Okay, they become sexually active at an earlier age. There are a number of reasons for that. And then, of course, if you become sexually active at an earlier age, there are a whole lot of risks associated with that, obviously, right? Teen pregnancy and STDs and, you know, all of the different problems that are associated with early sexual activity. But one thing that I want to point out to you, precisely because it's kind of mysterious, is the impact of fatherlessness on girls getting their menstrual periods. Now, this is something that's I would never have predicted, unless you are a biologist, probably none of you would have predicted, but it turns out that getting your period earlier is kind of a risk factor for girls, because if you're developing sexually earlier, you got a longer period of time to get in trouble, let's put it that way. You know, if you get your period at 10 versus getting your period at 13, you got a longer period of time to get in trouble. And there are other issues associated with it as well. So that's well known, that the early onset of menses is a risk factor for girls. It's also known that having your biological father in the home delays the onset of first menses. Having your biological father in the home has you get your period later. Girls will get their period later if their dad's in the home, their bio dad. And if there is an unrelated adult male in the home, they get their period earlier. Having an unrelated adult male in the home, they get their period earlier. Now, why is that? No one knows. The truth is no one knows, but that data is well established. And there are a bunch of theories, and the psychology guys argue about it back and forth and so on as to why that is. But nobody argues about the facts. Now, the reason I point that out is for two reasons. Number one, you can't say that that's all culturally determined and we could get rid of it if we just tried hard enough. We just had enough education, we could talk everybody out of that, okay? That's not going to happen in this case. Second reason I pointed out is precisely because it's so mysterious. You wouldn't have predicted that. You wouldn't have guessed that, right? And so that tells me that there is a lot going on in the biology of the family that we don't even understand. So if we go messing around with it and mucking about with it, we don't really know what we're doing. So that's why I think that's important to be aware of. So same-sex marriage undermines the basic principle of law and social practice that mothers and fathers are not interchangeable. Next slide, Steve. Thanks. Okay. Next key principle is that it's a basic principle of law and social policy that biology is the basic way we determine parenthood. In other words, if I say the word mother and father to you, that is completely intelligible to each and every one of you. You know exactly what I'm talking about. Mother, father, biological reality. To the point that if you see cartoons with you can pick out the mother horse and the daddy horse in the cartoons, right? You don't have to look underneath or anything. You can tell, right? Mother, father. It's all very obvious, okay? And it's completely understandable what we're talking about when we say mother and father. It's a biological category. And the basic principle of law is that you're using the biological category, right? The ordinary way we figure out who counts as a mom and a dad is the biological mother and father, subject to the exception that I mentioned earlier, okay? So biology is the basic way we do it. Same-sex marriage will undermine the biological principle in the following way. The institution of marriage, as it's currently understood, supports the biological principle. Because when a woman gives birth to a baby, her husband is assumed to be the father of any children that she gives birth to, okay? That's called the presumption of paternity in law, and it's a very deep principle in Anglo-American law, and as far as I know in all law, okay? It's a very deep principle. Establishing who the mother is isn't usually that complicated. Usually when a baby is born, there's a mother somewhere close by, although there are exceptions popping up now. But anyway, we usually know who the mother is. The problem is to attach the father to the baby. The problem is to figure out who the father is. And so the institution of marriage is designed to attach her husband to the baby. Why? Because in 95% of the cases, he is in fact the biological father of that child. Right? Why? Because marriage is supposed to be a sexually exclusive union of one man and one woman. Well, if it's in fact a sexually exclusive union of a man and a woman, then in fact her husband will be the father of all of her children. Okay? And therefore, you're attaching the child to the father just as firmly as to the mother. That's what marriage is supposed to do, is to give you the same degree of permanence and security in your attachment with the father as you have with your mother. That's what that presumption is supposed to do, the presumption of paternity. Now, with same-sex marriage, what the advocates of same-sex marriage are trying to do is to transform the presumption of paternity into a presumption of parentage. The presumption of parentage is that if I give birth to a child and I'm in a same-sex union, then the woman that I'm in the same-sex union with is presumed to be the other parent of that child, which in 100% of the cases is not true, right? In 100% of the cases, she is not the biological parent of the child. So to make this sleight of hand, to say that the presumption of paternity can be turned into a presumption of parentage and it will all be equal, it'll all be the same, this is simply not true. It has to undermine this principle that biology is the way we do it, right? It actively undermines the biological principle of how we determine who counts as a mother and a father. Can we go to the next slide, please? Okay, then the fourth principle, current principle of law and social practice, is that the state, has to do with the role of the state and the government and the law. And that is that the law recognizes parenthood, but doesn't determine what it is. The ordinary case is that if you give birth to a baby and you're in the hospital, a nice little lady will come around to you with a clipboard and a little form and say, who's the mother, who's the father? You register the fact that you're the mother and the father. You don't have to ask the nice little lady for permission to be the mother and the father. You just are the mother and the father. You're recognized as the mother and the father. You go to the state and write down your name. The state doesn't come to you and say, you count and you don't. That's not how it works. Now, what's happening with same-sex unions, whether they're civil unions or whether they're same-sex marriages or what have you, in some cases there's no legal status at all, the law is evolving to accommodate same-sex couples in the following way. There are cases where a woman has had a baby and she has a lesbian partner, and then the relationship breaks up. And the lesbian former partner wants to have an ongoing relationship with the child. So she goes to court to try to have herself declared a de facto parent. And courts are now beginning to recognize that, and what they have to do to recognize her claim is to reinvent parenthood. Basically, they have to reinvent parenthood. So for example, in the state of Washington, the state came up with a 4-part test to determine whether you counted as a parent or not. And it had to do with whether you held yourself out as a parent, whether you contribute to the support of the child, and a number of things like that. So what that means is instead of a nice bright line separating parents from non-parents, we now have this gray area where the state is getting involved in figuring out whether you changed enough diapers and wiped enough noses to count as a parent. And this is particularly significant, I think, because the whole of the gay legal establishment, if you want to call it that, is working on establishing de facto parenting rights. They consider this a very important part of their legal agenda. where there's same-sex marriage, where there isn't same-sex marriage. They consider this redefinition of parenthood to be very important. So the Lambda Legal and Education Fund goes around the country looking for these cases. So they're bringing suit in a case where a woman is not the biological mother and not the adoptive mother. So we have a person who is not the biological parent, not the adoptive parent, and Lambda Legal is there trying to get them parental rights. Let us call this person, the non-biological parent, the non-adoptive parent, let us call that person a non-parent. Okay, that is a non-parent. And what Lambda Legal is doing is trying to have courts declare parental rights or provide parental rights to non-parents. This is not a wholesome development, I would submit to you. And if you believe that that will stay just within the 3% of the population that calls themselves gay, it wouldn't be so bad. But there is no reason to think that that kind of development of the state taking that kind of authority over the definition of parenthood, that it's going to be confined just to lesbian couples. The idea that we would have one set of rules for lesbians and another set of rules for everybody else, I don't think that's a stable position. I don't think that's where we're going to end up. This will start to bleed into other areas, so that the whole area of step parenting, cohabiting parents, and all those kinds of issues are now going to be up for grabs, with the state deciding who counts as a parent. Rather than simply registering parenthood, they're going to be deciding who counts as a parent.